This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation. Good day, all of you. My name is Maria Kądzielska-Koper, and this is Common Sense Generation, video podcast about philosophy, values, community, and everything what is important. A place of free speech. And with me in the studio is George Byczynski, brought here straight from London. George, you are a geopolitical expert and the founder of British Poles community and a website, which is a very vibrant community, a platform for Poles who live in Britain. You publish articles in English, commentating a lot of things what's going on in the world and in UK, and a lot of people read you. So it's a niche. But I know you're connected and with the British Parliament and the Polish British Parliamentary Group. And I would say you comment a lot of things which are going on right now in the world. So since I have you here, tell me a few words about what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, you rightly said, I run British Poles, which is a community group of Poles living in the United Kingdom. As you may know, there's almost 1 million Poles living in the UK, which is a massive group that is very vocal, that is very important part of the social and political life. I'm also an advisor in the UK's Parliament, so I get to hear and see a lot of fascinating things happening in the hearts of one of the most important democracies in the world. Especially as a person of Polish origin, I am troubled to see what's going on in Ukraine, but I get to comment and help and get involved in a lot of projects related to Central and Eastern Europe.
So this is actually our topic, which right now is the biggest concern of us, this part of Europe, is of course the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. But as I realized that a lot of people in UK and in US already forgotten this going on, or they are just, let's say, tired with this topic. After all, how long can we help Ukraine? How long this conflict can work? But what is even worse is this, I would say, very stupid interview of Carson Tucker with Vladimir Putin. So it is this giving voice, a huge voice, who's with million views all over the world to the biggest Russian propaganda which can ever exist. And this is the voice to Vladimir Putin himself. So watching it, I myself, I couldn't say, first of all, what a stupid thing to make it so popular. Secondly, how many lies and how manipulative can be, naming things differently, changing the history of Europe with some truths and some falses. And for anyone who is not an expert and doesn't know more, with him, especially for the first 20 or 30 minutes, just running from the 16th century to the World War II and back again, and just basically saying that the Russian nation doesn't exist. I mean, the Ukrainian nation doesn't exist. Those are only Russians who rebelled at a certain moment, and they should be brought back to the mother of Russia, which is, of course, a false narrative and a very also unfair statement. And I want to, first of all, I want to bring down a lot of those extremely false informations which were there, and ask you about this opinion. Are people in UK, are Brits at all interested in Ukraine? Do they know how important is this conflict?
There's a lot of topics here, but you're absolutely right on so many of these issues. When it comes to fatigue, there is a real a war fatigue. People just cannot see every day the destruction, the suffering. People get either tired of it or it becomes too similar. So certainly with the Israel-Palestine conflict, this has slightly overshadowed the issues in Ukraine for a lot of people. I've even met one person who said it's all about Israel now. The Ukraine Ukraine conflict is finished, isn't it? So there are people who are barely following what's going on, unfortunately, in every society. But the British society is really focused still on the topic of Ukraine. They realize if Ukraine loses, Russia will take over, and this will be a threat to the future. At the moment, I think it's a very unpleasant thing to say. Ukraine can be and should be the buffer zone between the countries of NATO, and then Ukraine will be able to join NATO in the future, and Russia. If Ukraine fails right now, then we're all in danger. We're all in massive trouble. Russia will be able to say, we've succeeded, the West hasn't solidarized and haven't unified, and we're able to just simply invade other countries. So because of that, the Ukraine battle is a European battle. So I'm actually almost surprised that 100% of the British mainstream society is very strongly focused on this topic. When you speak to politicians, we just had the second anniversary of the war. We had, I think, at least 20 or 30 British MPs, including former prime ministers, visiting Kiev. So this topic is still very important. I know it may not be the case in some other countries, but for the Brits, stability of Europe is quite important. So there's a lot of discussions about that. When it comes to the interview, I think everybody should be interviewed, and it's not that certain people should not be interviewed, because that would be censorship. I believe in the freedom of speech. Everybody should be interviewed, but certain people who are involved in criminal activities, in wars, they should have been asked hard questions. Unfortunately, Tucker Carlson, sadly, I respect the journalist. He's done a lot of interesting interviews throughout his life, but he became romanticized very falsely in this distant, exotic Russia, which is a case for many Republicans, unfortunately. They think they are troubled with a lot of issues that are happening in America, according to them, right? You have wall problems, you have criminality problems, you have a lot of issues happening in the States. So they think if our leaders are supporting these issues, they're weak on the border, they're involved in some foreign conflicts, then clearly with Ukraine, there also may be something dodgy going on, this is not a real war, etc. You hear these arguments because they just say, if Hillary Clinton says this, and this, I need to be against 10 things. But really, maybe 9 things they can be right on according to their ideology, but one thing it should be uniting us all. They're not realizing that, as I said before, if Ukraine loses, then America and other NATO countries will have to spend way more, and there will be way more threats coming up to us in the future. So unfortunately, there is this sneaky romanticization of Russia.
I know it is even in a popular culture in this way that when in sitcoms or films Russia comes up, so they see it through the lenses of Dostoevsky, Pushkin, War and Peace. They made their own versions of those great novels, Russian novels, and they think that Russia looks like this because most of the Americans have never been there, never seen it, have never even passed through this part of Europe, so they don't really know what's going on and how to see the truth. And they see, okay, and the other thing what I think, unfortunately, that conservatives in US are in love with, they are sort of in love with power, and they see that Russia symbolized power for them. They were American adversary for a very long time. So even if they criticize Russia, they at least respected it in a way that, oh, there is wealth coming, there are people who do things, they are a partner to speak about, to be with. When they don't know that the everyday life of people in Russia is extremely poor, that the poverty of there's almost no middle class in Russia, only few cities, and that just the reality of life there and mentality, Russian mentality, is very grey, is very dark. And what we hear also, of course, right now, what's coming from the front and the conflict in Ukraine, this is the scale of brutality is only to be compared with what happened during the World War II.
Putin sells a story to everybody. So to the extreme left-wingers, he shows that he's the anti-imperialist hero. And a lot of left-wingers around the world, a lot of communist groups very close to Russia, they have been historically. You look at the 20th century, the cooperation of many British communists, American communists with Moscow. It was a real thing during the 1920 Battle of Warsaw. There were journalists writing positively about Russia. During the Second World War, there were a lot of journalists who covered up crimes committed by Russia. Look at Walter Duranty, an Anglo-American journalist, worked for the New York Times. He was covering up every crime that Russia was doing, and the Western audience was amazed. Oh, somewhere there's a strong leader, etc. While in the 1930s in Ukraine you had Holodomor, you had a genocide of the Ukrainian people. Actually, also Polish people were killed in the Holodomor, at least 100,000. Not many people know this, but in these areas Polish people lived as well. So this crime was covered up by certain journalists, and unfortunately this message that Putin sent to either extreme left or to a lot of those on the hard right that are believing, oh, what a strong leader. But it's because our societies in the West are crumbling. We don't have strong leaders. We have either elderly leaders or we have leaders who do not have very strong ideological or philosophical ground and vision. So because we miss this, because we look very often at our leaders and we are not so happy and we think, oh, I wish there was more vision and something that they would represent, and very often they don't. They're very often just focus on the economy or are a bit elderly, and for some, you know, it becomes a mockery. But Russia isn't like that. But it's because we don't know the other side of what's happening in Russia, because no other news come from Russia. So it's very easy to have, I mean, for example, what do you know about a country like Turkmenistan? You don't know probably much, because it's an authoritarian country which controls what information goes about it. So you don't know if there's any crimes against humanity committed there or not. You just simply don't know. And it's the same in Russia. There are a lot of well-cultured, great Russians who are not able to speak up.
Or who go outside, who left Russia when the war started. I absolutely agree with that. And the fact that they are criticizing, but they are in a minority, unfortunately. The majority of people are either scared, because right now Russia is even more threatened their free speech even more than 10 years ago. It's much more blocked and blocked from the Western world, but also people are more frightened to go outside. I'm surprised that that many people brought flowers and wanted to give honor to Alexei Navalny after he was murdered in the streets of Moscow, when every one of them needed to show their ID, everyone was written down, and every one of them their life was threatened, because the power in Russia right now puts in prison elderly for writing something on social media. So of course it is dangerous, but on the other hand, our duty, and especially of the Western world, is just not to believe certain things. And we have this wonderful opportunity. We have a voice, and this voice in English, we can say it openly. But people who are coming, the Ukrainians who are coming from the occupied territory and eventually ending up in Poland, and then later going further, Germany, Canada, they have seen horrible things.
Yes, absolutely, and their voice must be heard. But you know, you said let's not believe certain things. It's easy to say, but you really need to get into the details of it. So I think the message to conservatives, especially in America, but in a few other countries, is really, you know, actually go to Russia, see what it is like. And it's a bit different if, you know, as Tucker Carlson was taken into limousine, taken from one place to another, little show in a shop of how cheap things are. Well, just because things are cheap, it doesn't mean the wages of the people are high. According to different research, Russians spend 30, 40, sometimes 50% of their incomes on food. So yes, Russian food may be cheaper in the supermarket than in the US, but they also earn a lot less. But you know, you put up a video, say Russia is so cheap, their economy is great, ours isn't. So it's very unfair to look at that. There's few other things that needs to be taken into consideration. You look at abortion rates. How can conservatives support a country that has the most abortions in the world? Half of pregnancies in Russia end up with induced abortion. The statistics are absolutely insane, incredible. You look at Vladimir, it was Lenin who actually introduced abortion in 1920, and the Russians kept it since then, and not much has been done to prevent it. So how is that a conservative country with what's happening? That's argument number one. You look at marriages. Half of all the marriages end up with divorce. What a tragedy. Half is a huge number, also one of the highest in the world. I was looking into various statistics from around the country. In Northern Caucasus, for 1,000 marriages, there is 1,300 divorces. It means people have more divorces than they got married in a year. It's absolutely, I mean, these statistics are very sad. It's because it's a very fragmented society. They have a lot of issues. They're a very polarized society. A lot of people are frightened. They're not able to grow, to develop because of censorship, because of oligarchs controlling a lot of the country.
This is the element which we very often in the West, we see a very small minority of oligarchs' children or people connected who are going, of course, spending a lot of money in the hotels, giving nice tips during their vacation, but the majority of people is extremely poor, and they also don't have a perspective to grow, and they don't have a perspective for any like being entrepreneurial. And what I see also, it's not only Russia, but the Russian influence is still very deep and very strong on the neighboring countries, on the countries such as Armenia, Georgia, where they are, but Uzbekistan, many countries in the region who still people speak Russian, of course, is one thing, but they cannot fully develop, and the economies are sort of put in this coma. There are almost no middle class. When we look at the society, the one measure which shows the stability of is how much people are the size of the middle class, and the size of the middle class in Russia
is non-existent.
It's non-existent, exactly. So this is extremely scary, and what surprises me is the narrative of especially conservatives and Republicans in US, who is so extremely pro-Russian. And I'm asking myself, where does it come from that they lose the value of common sense?
Yes. Look, I think there's something called contrarianism, just being in the contrary to everything. There's a lot of people who are just annoyed. You know, they say, oh, these are various globalist forces. Everything is going wrong. We have less children. There's all these issues, right? And then they just dream of something else. Which country is normal? You know, that's what a lot of people say. Which country has high fertility rates and that is growing, etc., which they don't know. They're searching. And unfortunately, you know, Russia is not such a country, but yet they romanticize it. And it's actually sometimes, for example, during the Napoleonic Wars, I've read so many Brits were fascinated by Napoleon. This guy wanted to take over Britain. You know, he almost did. He failed because the English Navy was always absolutely dominant. But and for a few other reasons. But I went to some old houses, some architects and politicians. They would have Napoleon's pistol, Napoleon's sword, Napoleon's hat, or Napoleon touched this. And I'm thinking, why would you have that if he wanted to conquer England? But it's because people are fascinated by something, by something else. And I think it's because societies can be compared to family a little bit. what happens if you don't have a father in a family unit? It's destructive. It's very difficult for the children. For a boy, usually he's searching other role models because he doesn't have them. He may become more feminine because he only has mother, or he will take a random role model from the street, maybe the toughest guy on the street. So this is how it feels for a lot of people on the right in Europe and in America. That's why they're looking for another father. I would be, a psychologist would be able to look into that in more detail.
You're basically claiming right now that the Western countries and societies are fatherless, in a sense.
I strongly feel so. Unfortunately, it is the case. We have weak leaders who sometimes are very strong in rhetoric, but they're not doing much about it. Look at, for example, illegal migration. There's a lot of strong leaders who say we're doing something about illegal migration, yet it goes into record numbers absolutely everywhere in Western Europe. I went to Mongolia last year, and a politician there asked me, your continent is being invaded by illegal migrants, people of different cultures who are completely, just take over your continent. What are you doing about it? I'm not in the position to answer that question, but somewhere in Asia, somebody can ask you such a question because they notice there are things going wrong. So, yes, there are a lot of troubles. People search for religion, even though a lot of our societies are becoming more atheistic. People search for religion in times of disasters, in times of problems. I've read that in Ukraine in 2021, the people who said they're religious was about 64%, and about a year ago, which is a year after the war had started, the full-scale invasion, that went up by 10%. So about 75% now consider themselves religious to some extent. So more people are becoming religious because they see the tragedy of war and other issues.
This is Common Sense Generation. If you like this channel, please subscribe, share, and comment. Your voice really matters. And of course, in the fact that they don't have any more control over anything, and suddenly when you lose so much in your life, that what is left for you is this belief, of course, in God, and the fact that it always has sense. But I'm for a believer and a strong person. I see that it is, of course, this element which gives you meaning, and this is the salt of the world. If you lose faith, and if you just try to base everything on you, then you will lose, because so easily it slips away. But I don't want to evangelize here during this interview, because it's not the topic. The topic is, of course, the fact that I was strongly underline one thing, that there are still a lot of immigrants and a lot of refugees coming from Ukraine. The Ukrainian nation is very strongly united sort of through this war, and is fighting in every possible way they can. And we see people in a huge poverty, especially coming right now from the occupied territories, which are taken by Russians, and where children are forced to go to schools when they have a huge amount of propaganda, where they have a national Russian anthem, the Russian flag, the portrait of Putin. They are not learning a normal subject, but they usually have to build up and the machine guns and everything. So they're trained to become soldiers, and Russians from those territories, they incorporate children 16, 17 years old, 18 years old to the army. And we hear all of those things from the refugees who are coming, and they are able to reach Poland. They usually, when they flee from the occupied territories, they have to do it through the Russian border, then from the Belarusian border, and then eventually ending up in Poland. They very often go further to Canada, to US, to Norway, to Sweden. So they are ending up somewhere there. So everyone who is listening to us, I do hope that it's still a very important message that we have to help Ukrainian refugees, because they are in desperate conditions.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, just look at the numbers, right, of how many millions of Ukrainians are all around the world now and are not there to rebuild their economy, or just because they had to flee because their houses and their schools were destroyed. Yeah, I visited the front line last year, and it was really a terrifying experience, but also really eye-opening experience. If you don't see the destruction, then you can, live an easier life.
You're not rooted, and don't see that it's serious. I myself, I wouldn't believe it neither, that the war would start and we would have crowded train stations with mother and children sleeping on the floor. But it happened, and I know that you've organized this meeting and a conference in London devoted to the Polish help and Polish aid to the Ukraine. Could you tell a few words what happened there and how did it look like?
Yes, we had a very successful large conference in London in the One Whitehall place. It was attended by almost 200 people, MPs, lawyers, journalists, and a lot of people who are involved in humanitarian aid. And we basically showed the scale of Polish support for Ukraine in that time period. We had incredible speakers. We had General James Everard, NATO's former deputy commander, a lot of other MPs and Telegraph and other journalists. It was really meaningful, and you could really feel this unity between Britain, Poland, and Ukraine. And look, there are a lot of issues now between Poles and Ukrainians, and I probably will not get into the detail. It's economic, it's historical. There's a lot of issues. We need to speak about them. We need to get into them. We cannot forget them, because I think it's actually a mistake if you forget about the issues, say there's a more important issue now, and forget about certain problems that you have. I believe if there is a problem, discuss it. And I've had a lot of discussions, very fruitful discussions with Ukrainians over the recent years, and they sometimes don't know certain things. So discussion is important. But in terms of the event, it was very needed, just to remind people that there is still a war going on.
But I also would say with this element, even if there are certain disagreements right now on the political scale, I have to remind that Poland is a huge friend of Ukraine. And I do hope that this opening, and I see this on a personal level, that because of this war, the good fruit of it is the fact that people who never seen Poland before, who never seen Polish people, who had some vision very often based on a Russian propaganda from the Soviet time, they've never been abroad before. They needed to left Ukraine because of the bombs and war, and they end up in Warsaw, and they see Polish volunteers, they see Polish help, they see people who are speaking to them here, giving them work, and they are very different. And this huge friendship on a personal level grows and becomes stronger. And this is the answer to the Russian propaganda. This is the answer to the violence what happened there. And this is the friendship here, because I would say, of course, it's important not to forget the history, but a 10-year-old, 11-year-old children who came from Ukraine, they have nothing to do with anything what happened during the World War II. But it is important what's happening right now to them. And it is important the fact that they are learning Polish language, that they are attending Polish schools, and they received this enormous amount of help and friendship, which they needed here in Warsaw. And also Poland became this huge advocate of a Ukrainian claim, which is also a Polish claim, because we don't want this war on the Polish soil. And I would refer here to the speech of Radosław Sikorski, which we recently heard, which was a very good speech on it. How would you comment on this?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, look, the Russian lies are just floating around, so it's very important to just pick them bit by bit, right? And really explain what's going on. And it's definitely, when it comes to the war, and the Polish foreign minister was absolutely right in his speech. And just as we discussed, right, when the conservatives that I speak to from America, and I tell them the issues of abortion, the issues with other propaganda, the issues of marriages. Also, we touched upon the church, right? There's a bit of mystery, I think, about the Orthodox Church. That's why people are intrigued by internet, you know, because the way they wear, they dress up, and the singing is beautiful. So there's that mystery about the Orthodox Church. But the amount of people that go to church in Russia is minuscule. I think less than 10% of the people who consider themselves religious actually go to church once per month, and that's percentage in America is 30%. So American religious people go to church 3 times as much as they do in Russia. But there's that mystery. But really, you look at who's behind the Russian Orthodox Church, and it's the KGB. So anybody thinks there's something attractive about that church at that certain moment needs to realize there's a very strong political ex-KGB, or I guess you're never ex-KGB influence over that church. So, I mean, these are really interesting and terrifying topics that we really need to look at and compare. Otherwise, we're just fooling ourselves. We can't be foolish. We need to look at all the data and then be able to really discuss these topics. So Russian propaganda is enormously powerful and is very smart. They're smarter than we think they are, because they, as I said, to the right-wingers, they say one thing. To the left-wingers, they say another thing. And everybody finds something interesting there. So we really need to be on guard, and we really need to have a lot of fact-checking. And I love that, for example, on X, formerly Twitter, you have this community knows, where, you know, when people put out lies, and there's enough moderators around the whole world who can challenge these lies, you have these no's, and this is incredible because it's community driven. Of course, there may be some forces of you know, some moderators grouping up, but it's community driven. Very different to what Facebook has, which is an unknown group of moderators who just say this is right, this is wrong, and that's a little bit scary actually, because who are these moderators? Well, with X, you have a very good tool to target propaganda and lies out there.
Well, it is very important message in the punchline of this interview, I guess, George. But what else we can do except just showing the truth? And the message also of this video podcast is, well, if you want to keep the virtue of common sense, then definitely you have to go back to the reality, try to be informed with everything, give up romanticizing and ideas, and check what is behind the backseat, what is real, how it really looks like. And very often it's very different than we actually picturize it, or we see this in the movies or in the books. Well, this was George Byczynski in Common Sense Generation, a place and a platform for free speech. And I do hope that you will yourself, this will inspire you to actually see the true face of Russia, but also to see what's going on in Ukraine, how this is an ongoing conflict, and maybe look around if there are refugees around you, if you can be an aid to them, because it is right now a very important thing to do. And I would like to thank the Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible. This is Common Sense Generation.